Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. I am so excited that each of you are here with us today. Thank you so much. One of our most valuable assets, in my opinion, is our time. So I really want to thank each of you for giving us your time today so that we could learn from Aimee and the work that she is doing, and that all of us could leave here and be inspired to go do the work that God has called each of us to do. I know so many of you, and I'm so happy to see so many of you. If I don't know you, my name is Ryan King, and I have the privilege of serving as the CEO of Ardent Mentoring. And Ardent provides affordable access to subject-specific, whole-person executive mentoring for impact-driven entrepreneurs in order to help them scale so that we can see their impact multiplied. So most importantly, the reason we do everything is so that we can see more lives transformed. And that's our hope today, is that we would be inspired to go do the work that God has called us to do so that we could see more lives transformed. And if you are on this call and you're not familiar with us and you'd like to meet with us, you can connect with us right through our website. We would love to talk to you about being a mentor or a mentee with our program, or just about the work that we do. Without further ado, I am so excited to welcome Aimee Minnich to the Ardent Approach podcast today. Aimee spent years leading at the intersection of law, faith, and high-stakes stewardship, including her time as president and general counsel of the National Christian Foundation Heartland during an area where they crossed the $1 billion threshold in total capital raised and deployed. Driven by a vision to see charitable dollars fund transformative missional companies, she co-founded the Impact Foundation, where she serves as chief impact officer and general counsel. And to date, her team has helped mobilize more than $900 million in impact investments. Wow, praise God. And on top of all of these amazing things, Aimee is also a former Ardent mentee. So she knows firsthand the power of combining operational strategy with deep relational mentorship. Aimee, it is an absolute pleasure. It is an absolute honor to have you here with us today. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me. And thanks everybody for spending some time this morning or afternoon or evening, depending on where you are on the globe.
Aimee, I still remember when I called you to say, Aimee, I would love to have you be an Ardent mentor. And your response was, Ryan, thank you. I'm really honored. In this season, I need to be an Ardent mentee. And I was just blown away by that. And we luckily had the privilege of matching you with a great mentor. And so thank you so much for that honor and that privilege.
That was a fantastic match. Thank you. Yeah.
There
are not very many opportunities as a leader to be led. And I really appreciate that you guys were able to provide somebody who could come alongside and offer counsel and wisdom and a listening ear. So thank you.
You are welcome. It was a great honor and a privilege to do so. Aimee, when you were transitioning from practicing law to leading the National Christian Foundation and then co-founding the Impact Foundation, what was one of the biggest mindset shifts you had to make? And did you have a mentor in that season who helped you navigate that pivot?
Yeah. Those two were very different transitions. Going from the law firm to Christian ministry was, I will say, disorienting. And one of the biggest consistent shifts that I've had to make is understanding how to lead from a position of Christ-like surrender. It's not a one-time shift. It's an all-the-time shift. And it has lots of ways that plays out. So in a law firm, the way to succeed is to sort of wear a good facade. You can't win a negotiation. You can't win a lawsuit without a pretty good facade. And the way to lead well in Christian ministry was actually to drop the facade and to acknowledge one's dependence on the Lord with authenticity and vulnerability. And so that shift was pretty significant. And figuring out how to do that well and appropriately isn't super easy. And then the other significant shift that I continually have to make is to acknowledge that I am not what other people think of me. I am not the position that I hold, and I am not what I have. That identity shift is not a one-time thing. It's an everyday thing. And so as I've navigated those transitions, those shifts, I have had some great mentors um, at, at each point along the way. And some were official and some were unofficial. But mentorship has been significant in all of that.
Your response makes me think a lot, that vulnerability. Can you dive a little deeper into that sort of humility, vulnerability you had to have at that time in order to make that transition successful?
Authenticity and vulnerability is important for any leader. And in particular, at the time, so when I left the law firm and joined the National Christian Foundation, I was 28. When I left NCF and started Impact Foundation, I was 34. And I have been given lots of opportunities to receive feedback. And one of the things that people have told me is that I'm a little scary. And so the decision to embrace vulnerability is a conscious one, to say, I actually don't understand why I would be scary, because I see inside my head and know that I'm really just mostly making it up as I go along most of the time. And to let people in to understand, I don't know what I'm doing, but I trust deeply in the God of the universe who does know what he's doing, and take my direction from him. So please don't follow me unless you think I'm leading toward Christ. That's the ultimate vulnerability that I think a leader needs, to say, you should only follow me if we are walking together toward Christ. There's a lot more that could look like, but.
Wow. I'm so glad I asked that follow-up question, because it's a little bit of gold right there. Thank you, Aimee. Many entrepreneurs see charity and business as two completely separate tracks, but you have bridged them so beautifully. What was some of the specific aha moments that convinced you the Impact Foundation had to exist?
Great question. The idea for the Impact Foundation came at a very specific moment, sitting around a conference room table in Florida, sitting with Bob Collins and Jeff Johns, and it was late January or early February of 2015. And we wrote it on the whiteboard and we said, that's it. And we named it and we knew what it was, but it was building along the way to that point. Growing up, I had wrestled with questions of, I'm watching a lot of people make a bunch of money in business and then give it away to charity. And sometimes the way that they're making money isn't as redemptive as it could be. And then they give to charity to sort of make up the difference for the things that were not as redemptive as they could have been in business. And that doesn't seem super efficient. It seems like there might be a better way to do that. And then working at the National Christian Foundation, we had some givers who said, I'm making grants to make XYZ impact in the world, to further the gospel. Could I also make investments that would complement those grants? And that was the beginning of the aha moment. But where it really crystallized for me what the big idea was, I've told this story a whole bunch of times, but we got asked to make an investment that was a loan to a nonprofit, an inventory financing loan. And the first aha was, well, we're already making investments. Why not make an investment that aligns with the mission of the person who put the dollars aside in the first place? And so the aha was, oh, the tax code actually allows this. It's in the tax code. It's been there since 1963. And there are rules around it. So aha of, oh, wow, this is allowed. And then the second aha was when we got the thank you video back from the ministry that we'd lent to, and the program director in Uganda named it so beautifully. She said, there are two things my people need, Jesus Christ and business, because together they can transform our culture. And that's when it crystallized. That's it. That's what, yes, I'd read Toxic Charity and When Helping Hurts, and I'd seen the statistics coming out of Haiti. I'd seen that charity is really, really important. Philanthropy is really, really important. And it's not going to solve everything. There's not enough capital in the world. The amount of capital that's been set aside for charity is about 1.4 trillion, which is a lot of money. But the wealth of the world, about all of the rest of it, but in the hands of Christians, it's about 45 trillion, isn't charitable. It's in our 401ks and our retirement accounts. It's in our bank accounts. It's in our business assets. Most of the wealth of the world is not charitable. So if we're relying on philanthropy to solve problems, we won't have enough capital. That's point one. Point two is business models are actually essential to creating the elements of flourishing that are needed. Job creation, purpose, work, these are good things. And if we can create the capital flows to businesses that are going to create jobs that have good value behind them and value creation, the world is going to be a better place. So that was sort of the aha moment where I realized this is the future of philanthropy. But the actual mechanics of what Impact Foundation became, that happened one day in the cold months in Florida in 2015.
Well, I'm so glad that you and your team took the time to start this. I love how the impact investing you do creates jobs and therefore feeds families and therefore transforms lives. But you spoke a little bit too, and I've seen this. I've been part of an organization that has multiplied about 16, 17 million in capital into about 70 million in loans, and we've recycled it. And one of the things you touched on, and one of the things I just want to highlight from what you said, is that there's something deeper, that when we make that investment and we're not just giving everything away, there are times in disaster relief we need to give away and we need to go help. But when we make that investment, dignity is repurposed. People realize their giftings. They see God moving through them. And I remember my friend from Ethiopia once telling me, it's so much better when you teach somebody to go build the bridge than when you build the bridge for them. So they can look at their children and say, I built that bridge. You walk across it and you build the house or the school on the other side of the bridge. And so just if you would just share from your heart for a moment, Aimee, where does a story or something that's inspired you where you've just seen dignity born through an impact investment?
I watched it in the eyes of women in Nicaragua in 2017. We were there with Opportunity International. They had a great development program, and then there were some entrepreneurs who'd come alongside the opportunity work in Nicaragua and said, actually, let's invest in some businesses too. And so we spent the first part of the morning visiting people who had received charity because they needed it, but they were in a position where food was being delivered on trucks and they were just receiving. And there was just a sense of it. Yes, I have what I need to keep feeding my kids, but most of the day, I don't have much to do. I don't know what I do that adds value to the world. We were made for work, not because God needs our efforts, but because he's honored when we bring the best of how he made us to him and allow him to use it. And there's something really sad when we are not able to use our gifting. Like we know it, we feel it. When we're in a position where the way that we are wired is not effective, not helpful, not able to be released. So the morning in Nicaragua, we went and visited some women who received handouts, and their faces looked sort of downcast or neutral. In the afternoon, we went to visit women who were part of a franchise business where they had a storefront in the front of their homes where they were selling yogurt and fresh fruits and vegetables and things that their neighbors needed. They were able to provide for their family, and they provided something to their neighborhood that their neighbors needed. Their faces looked totally different. They were lit up, describing the difference that this franchise business had made in their lives. You could see it. You could feel it. It was a tangible expression of this is why we do this work.
Wow. The power of dignity, purpose, meaning, all at work through people's gifting.
Yeah.
Super inspiring. Thank you so much, Aimee. It's just incredible the work you're doing. What a great story. Thinking of the other side of the coin, what are some of the biggest misconceptions faith-based entrepreneurs have about profit, sustainability, and economic impact?
I don't see this as much anymore, but when people first approached the conversation, they can come with this idea that profit is not as valuable as mission attainment. And I hate that idea because profit allows mission attainment. If you don't have some margin, you can't do all of the good things that God called us to do. We have to have an economically viable business and mission. It's not one or the other. If we can't get to a place of margin in our lives and our time and our financial statement, it's going to be really, really hard to produce the sustainable fruit of the mission. So that would be one. Another would be that there aren't others like me. One of the things that I think happens a lot to entrepreneurs in our space is they can start to think, I'm the only one who sees this, who cares, who's doing the work. There aren't other investors who will ever understand. There aren't other entrepreneurs like me. And that's just not true. So that's one of the reasons that I love what Ardent is doing to bring alongside a mentor, but also to build community, because it's so very important that we find folks who are rowing in the same direction, maybe a different boat, but we're all trying to move the same direction.
Yeah. And I find it so important that we need to bring those things together, that we need to bring community together. We need to bring understanding about what nonprofits do and what we can do together alongside of for-profit companies, how we can merge and how we can align. I find in my community often that there's grave misunderstanding around the nonprofit and that they think it's a death sentence to making any type of money, to being successful, to being profitable, to really making the transformation that they want to make. And yet I try to implore them that, hey, it has so many more avenues to transform lives sometimes than for-profits do. But really when we combine the two, and I love people that launch social enterprises to do both. Have you seen a good example of that through the work you've done at the Impact Foundation of someone who's, half of what they do is for-profit, half of what they do is nonprofit, and they weave those two together well?
We have over 1,000 companies in our portfolio. So there are literally hundreds of stories of companies like that. I do think it's sometimes helpful to back up and say, how did we get to this place where we accepted something that is so untrue? Because if we can understand how we all got to the wrong conclusion, it can help us get back on track toward the right conclusion. And it happened in two significant ways. One was theological. We said, we accepted the premise that the only thing that matters is getting people to a conversion experience. And nobody says it that way, but we sort of saw a primacy of the thing that matters the most is that moment of decision, which, not to diminish that at all in any respect, but I do think it creates sort of a false dichotomy where anybody who's out preaching the gospel is seen as better than somebody who's maybe taking an approach that says, I'm going to seek the flourishing of my community and pursue the gospel in both word and deed, which tends to be more the expression of mission-aligned businesses. Not to say that we don't need both. We absolutely do. But we sort of saw this expression of one is better than the other. And that's a theological misconception that I think N.T. Wright does a pretty good job of helping unpack in his theology of the four-part gospel, where before the fall, work existed. And then we had this place where sin entered the world and we were waiting for our Savior. And now we live in this place where we know the future is coming, where there will be no sin and there will be no death, and we will be perfectly united in heaven, and the bride of Christ will be perfected. The kingdom will be complete. But we live in this now but not yet of the kingdom of God, where Jesus said the kingdom is now, and it's also coming. So the sort of imperfect expression of we see the kingdom breaking in, but we still have sort of this, he hasn't come back yet. And in that now but not yet place of the kingdom story, there's an opportunity for a lot of different kinds of things to matter and be expressions of the gospel. And I think that kind of theology informing the way that we enter into the world as entrepreneurs is really, really helpful. So that's on the theological side. On the really practical side, our tax code says you're either a nonprofit, you're either a tax-exempt charity who doesn't have to pay taxes, or you're a business that does have to pay taxes. And most people stop there. But there's actually a lot underneath both of those two things where you can kind of blend and pull together the best of both worlds. It's what I've made my career in at Impact Foundation, is bringing together the best of both worlds. I didn't answer your question about stories. Sorry. That's
okay. That's okay. I can fill in a little bit of story for you there because I had one mentor who told me, Ryan, nonprofit's just a tax classification. Let's go be super successful and super profitable. And he knew my father. He said, like your father was in business, so that we can transform many more lives. And then I had another fabulous mentor who told me, hey, Ryan, when you spread the gospel, or as he called it in this example, the good news, he said, I don't know how much good news it is in a village that doesn't have food and water if you don't show up with food and water. And he said, and then if you leave that village and you've not helped them understand how to bring that back to themselves every day, provide jobs, build wells, whatever it may be that the work that it's doing. I want to point out a great organization called Water For. And Water For does amazing work to bring water into people's homes from the wells, that have been built over the last 2 decades in what they're doing. And I love that idea that you said, that let's make good news holistic.
Yes.
Let's make good news profitable. I think of the times you read in church history when those Christ followers were the leaders in the arts and the media and the government and all these places. And somehow we've pulled away from that. And maybe that's a little bit from what you said. We got so concentrated on that conversion experience, we missed the holistic piece of the gospel.
It's like my kids. If all I did was teach them to read scripture, their souls might be safe, but they wouldn't know how to enter into the world and be helpful to anyone. My daughter, we have to also work on learning how to cook. All of my kids are learning how to cook. And the art and the joy is in weaving in the gospel message in all of those things that I get to teach my kids. It's similar to how a great social enterprise can weave in the gospel truth into all of the things that it's doing, from finances to building product to interacting with vendors.
Yeah, I agree with you. And maybe I'll just say a quick thank you to all of the amazing social entrepreneurs who are here with us today that are doing this work, that are shaking your heads and you're saying, yes, I know, I do this, I'm there with you. And so thank you to all of you that are doing that. Aimee, for all of these amazing high capacity social entrepreneurs listening right now and who will be listening, over the next couple of months through the podcast, all of these amazing people who are trying to get their ventures off the ground. Coming right from you, who's done over 900 million in impact investment, what makes an enterprise truly investable to an organization like the Impact Foundation?
That is a big question. I'm going to boil it down to the essence of there needs to be a product or service that meets an actual need to an actual discrete set of customers. And that need needs to be value added such that somebody will pay for it. You got to have a product or service, you got to have a defined customer set, and you got to have an economic model that works for the business. And then you have to have a team that can execute on what you're trying to bring to market. There's a lot that goes into that, but it's basically that.
There is. And I think of Ardent. Our niche is these incredible impact-driven entrepreneurs. And we want to bring them the expertise that they're missing, because all of us have areas where we need to grow. We all have blind spots. We want to bring them that expertise. There's so many people on the call here who haven't retired. They've repurposed themselves. And one way they've repurposed themselves as incredible mentors in the work that we're doing and through a lot of other amazing mentoring organizations. And so we bring these social entrepreneurs, these impact, driven entrepreneurs, this expertise that they need. And luckily, we are able to fund ourselves by a separate group of people who have said, we'll underwrite your operations, and then so many mentors who pour into our scholarship fund. And so I agree with you. I was, when the idea of Ardent was first presented to me as like a little baby zygote, we built on it a lot, but I was like, I wonder if that's needed. And we hit the ecosystem, and I was just like, wow, just like me. I've had a mentor for 21 years now. At every day of my life, it has switched people over time for 21 years. And wow, learning my blind spots, being humble enough to say that I don't know something, I don't see everything, I made some mistakes, has been so beneficial to me in that journey. And I'll just say, Aimee, is there an area where you felt a mentor really helped you, pointed out a blind spot for you that helped you lead to a different level of success? Sorry to put you on the spot there.
Every day.
Every day.
Right. I shouldn't say it feels like it's every day recently. There have been some really important pivot points in life, and making sure you surround yourself with people who are willing to say the hard things in love, even if you don't want to hear them. And I don't know if you're familiar with the Enneagram. I'm an Enneagram 3,
Okay.
which means I really want everybody to see me as being put together and knowing what I'm doing. The sin of the Enneagram 3 is deception. We're very good at it. Classic Enneagram 3s are Bill Clinton and Ronald Reagan. So we, Enneagram 3s, need people who will tell us the truth. So I have been surrounded by a lot of Enneagram 8s and Enneagram 1s who are justice seekers and truth tellers. And one of them is my board chair, David Wills. He is an unofficial official mentor. It's actually his job to point me in the right direction and tell me stuff I don't necessarily want to hear.
It is always
It's
fun.
nice when those people are built into your lives.
It is. And it's always fun to hear something you don't want to hear, but you know you need to hear it.
Yeah, fun's not the word, but I'm glad that you find that fun.
Okay, I'm glad that I find it fun. I feel like I have to admit a blind spot now that I put you on the spot. So in 2007, a fabulous friend of mine, God rest her soul, who's now in heaven, Barb Lemon, said to me, Ryan, you're not a great listener. And so I've been working on this. And if you looked at my LinkedIn, I actually just posted on it recently. So I've been working on it for 19 years now of learning to listen. And so if you're ever with me and you see me bite my bottom lip, it's because I'm telling myself, wait, why am I talking? Is what I'm saying to myself in my head. I have two of those things. I use halt when I'm making decisions. If I'm hungry, angry, lonely, or tired, I don't make a decision. And then when I'm with somebody, I bite my bottom lip and I say, wait, Ryan, why am I talking? And those have been fabulous things that mentors have given me and huge blind spots in my life. And so I guess I do find it, maybe it's fun when I look back on it. I'm thinking back on it. Maybe that's
Yes.
what's fun. Yes.
Yeah.
All right.
It actually
All right.
really is fun to be able to watch sometimes we don't see what God is doing. Most of the time, I don't see what God is doing. And I trust that the Holy Spirit is at work, making me more and more into the image of his son. But the great thing about mentors and why I think you said it was fun is because those are times where we can look back and say, actually, I do see the fruit. I do see ways in which I am becoming more Christ-like. So for instance, you with listening, for me, I have to stop talking, which is similar, but stop talking and let people come to their own conclusions. Just this morning, somebody gave me that very direct feedback. I'm going into a meeting and I'm not allowed to talk.
That's really good.
Not
It's
this
really
one.
good for
Supposed to
now
talk this
too,
one.
because I feel like soon I need to stop talking so that we can hear some of the fabulous questions that are being put in the chat. So I'm going to make this my last question, and then I'll do a little bit less talking. Maybe I won't stop, but I'll do a little bit less. But you've said before and you alluded to it earlier, that the right way to handle risk starts with asking, okay, God, what I have is yours. How do we steward it? How can a founder, who are joining us today and a lot who are listening in, balance sharp, tactical risk management with bold, radical faith?
That is such an important question because it requires us to sit long enough with the discomfort and the problem to understand what are the risks that are actually in this equation. How can I mitigate them? And where am I being asked to accept the risk and trust versus where am I asked to steward what I've been given in such a way as to avoid that risk? And we can't apply the same formula every time. And so I know you said you had Terry Looper on a webinar recently. The gift that he has given us in his writings and in his teachings is to say, you have to stop long enough to get to a place where that has settled in. And he calls it getting neutral. But what we have when we get neutral is we have gotten to a place where we aren't mistaking risks. So what I mean by that is I can label a particular activity as too risky for a lot of logical reasons, but what I'm really doing is avoiding the risk that I don't want to take personally. And so when we sit long enough in a place where we can get neutral, we've sort of processed through the personal risks that feel really scary and gotten to a place where we can say, okay, God, I'm good with that.
Yeah. Amen. I almost burnt out in 2017. And it wasn't until about 2022 that I met Terry. And then, in reading his book that he later wrote called Sacred Pace, just transformative in my life. And so if you've not read Sacred Pace, if you're anywhere near burnout, especially, please go get it today. There's a great article. I'm going to post it right here talking about going from burnout to a sacred pace with a conversation with Terry. And so I put that in the chat for everyone. But wow, that is a fabulous, fabulous example here, Aimee, of what we're talking about is having that sacred pace, having that time with God, and making sure that we're not running ahead of him and that we're really balancing, risk management alongside of radical faith, that we're not overlooking profit and its ability to transform lives.
Yeah.
So our first two questions from our audience, Aimee, come from two amazing friends, both named David. We'll go with David Pollux first. And he said, what would be your textbook definition of social enterprise?
I would love to give you a textbook definition. I'm not actually super hung up on the vocabulary. I'm sure there is a correct one. So I'm going to give you my definition and then completely acknowledge that it might be wrong according to the textbooks. But a social enterprise is one. So take enterprise, business, nonprofit, something that enters into the world with some kind of economic model. And even an economic model that has donations as part of it. But there's some kind of economic model that comes from the provision of goods and services into the world. So that's the enterprise part. The social part connotes that it's trying to do something that is good for people, good for the environment, and good for the world around. So there you go.
Yeah, an enterprise focused on making an impact. I often think, financially, environmentally, socially, spiritually, and in those different types of ways. Another good friend, David Adams, says, can you share with us a concrete example of mission drift that you have observed in your work?
That would require me to throw somebody under the bus. So let me think. I'm buffering until I find one that would be safe and not throw somebody under the bus. I will say this from Impact Foundation. One way that we have avoided mission drift is to stay laser focused on our hedgehog, the thing that we can uniquely do, because it's really tempting. We have a high performance team, and we have an economic model that works, and there are shiny objects that come our way all the time. And we're driven by two entrepreneurs with shiny object syndrome. We genuinely love to create stuff. We love to take opportunity and pursue it. And mission drift in a context like that is pretty tempting and hard to recognize sometimes because we can justify anything as fitting within our mission. And so we measure it against what is our hedgehog. And the hedgehog idea from Jim Collins, Good to Great, the thing that you wake up passionate about every morning. It drives your economic engine, and you can be the best in the world at it. And the last part requires some honesty, because especially in as a kingdom entrepreneur, we can say, I could be the best in the world at it, but we also have to ask, am I stepping on somebody else's swim lane? And am I exercising humility in my decision to try to be the best in the world at it? So guarding against mission drift at Impact Foundation means specifically saying things like, we're not going to put ourselves out into the world as being a full service donor advised fund. NCF, best in the world at taking complex assets and turning them into charitable giving dollars. We're not going to make our name that way. We're going to focus on our swim lane, which is charitable impact investing. So taking cash and investing it in businesses or alongside nonprofits that can have impact in the world.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Real quick, do you remember the book? You said an N.T. Wright quote earlier. Do you remember the book that came from?
I do not remember names very well, but I will look for it and let you know when I find it.
Okay, and we can look too, and we'll put that out there as well. We'll put that in the follow-up email you all receive about the podcast. And maybe not one of my blind spots, but I forgot I should be calling on people and talking less. I said it before, so I told you it was a blind spot of mine. So I'm going to do it. So if you could go ahead and unmute Greg Squires. Greg has a really good question here.
I think I got it. Hello,
There we
Aimee
go. Hey.
and Ryan.
Hey, Greg.
Yes. So you mentioned this dichotomy of the tax legal, for-profit, nonprofit. So my question is, how can impact organizations simply and clearly communicate their charitable intent without using the shorthand nonprofit, especially if using one of these blended structures like a perpetual purpose trust? And then maybe to give you a minute to think, you mentioned that social enterprise is like a shorthand way to do that, which you got to briefly. But yeah, please go ahead, share.
I think it varies by audience, because I have had the opportunity thousands of times to explain what Impact Foundation does, and I've noticed that certain things resonate with certain people and not with others. So, for instance, a 20-year-old or a 25-year-old has an expectation of what businesses should do that is actually more like a social enterprise. Their operating principle is businesses should have a positive social component. And so just simply saying we're a business that seeks to be a good citizen of our neighborhood would be a shorthand way. I'm not giving you an actual answer, because I do think the audience matters. If you want me to give me some options, and I'll pick one.
Yeah, well, think about there are customers, and that's an audience that you want to reach, right? If you're a brand that's trying to do more than virtue signal. And then, of course, the investors and donors, they have a different language. So I think you're getting at, depending on who you're talking to. So maybe with customers for, say, a faith-based organization that is trying to signal, like, hey, this product is intended for a really good outcome, but it is actually a for-profit structure with a charitable underpinning and some charitable funding. How would you say communicate to customers?
To customers, understanding what matters to them first is super, super important. I'll use a story here. Masaka Creamery, who, if you're not familiar with them, we should be praying for them. They had a devastating fire at their facility, but they had a choice to make a couple years ago. It's a creamery. They make yogurt, and they employ mostly deaf employees. And their decision was, do we want to be a deaf employer who makes yogurt, or do we want to be a yogurt company who employs deaf people? And the difference matters significantly, particularly to customers. So if they want to be the best yogurt company in the world or in Uganda, and they happen to employ deaf people, that says to their customer, your experience of our yogurt is the most important thing for you. And by the way, we happen to employ people who wouldn't otherwise have jobs. That choice matters in how they express their brand to their customers. But understanding what's important to a customer needs to inform that choice. So I think it's kind of a circular reference there. For investors, having a solid business model that you can execute on is table stakes. And then you can layer on the impact and talk about how the world's going to be a better place because you exist. But it's not going to work for very long to have a thin economic model that isn't going to support the mission that you want to achieve.
Super helpful, Aimee. Thank you.
Thank you, Greg. Good to see you too. Next question comes from a friend who I just met this past April at the Lions Den, Dallas. Incredible organization. Lions Den Birmingham's coming up. If you don't know about that, feel free to attend. Incredible organization. But his last name is Florida. If you could unmute Scott Florida. I don't know why when I met him, I'm like, wow, that's a fabulous last name. And he has a good question here. Go ahead, Scott, when you are ready.
Aimee, Ryan, thank you so much for taking the courage to step into new organizations. You know, what you have done is just incredible and how much it's grown. So, and what you're offering to the rest of us here is so helpful. So thanks. What are you finding to be the primary whys behind the Impact Foundation investors? Another way to say that would be like, what are the key impact investments, like categorically, that you see them looking for? And do you see any holes in what's available to them for investment regarding what's they're passionate about?
Yeah. There's two kinds of whys. There's the unspoken why, the true motivator. And then there's the why, that is what informs my actions. And they're not quite the same, but they're important to understand. The unspoken whys of most kingdom impact investors are three things. I want to make sure when I stand before the Lord of Lords and King of Kings that he feels good about how I stewarded his stuff. The second one is similar, but has a quite slightly different expression, which is, this world is a hard place. There's a lot of brokenness. What can I do that's going to have an impact for good? And then the third one is, I'm a little afraid or a lot afraid that my money's going to mess up my kids. And how can and there's an intersection of all of those three underwriting concerns that expresses itself in the desire to do impact investing. So understanding that, I think, is really important, because if we don't sort of grapple with those three questions, we're going to kind of wander around and mess around in the end point of where we're going. Because, and here's why that's the case. What has God wired me for? What has he given to me? What is his heart that I am sensing for impact in the world? And what are my kids also passionate about? Because stewardship should involve the next generation. And so those three questions have to inform sort of the answer to what is the impact I'm seeking. And until people wrestle with all three of those questions, there tends to be a little bit of fog in what it is that they're seeking. I'm not sure I answered your question.
Yeah, so I think you gave me the framework, which is fantastic. I was just wondering if you had like some of those categories, like what are the conclusions from those three pieces once you put them all together and blend up all the investors that you work with or impact folks that you work with? What are some of the key categories that come out of that?
Evangelism and discipleship, gospel proclamation, and teaching people to follow Jesus. And narrowing that down, the categories underneath that tend to be culture shaping film and media, specific geographies. So being a gospel centered entrepreneur in difficult places around the globe, or a specific place on the globe. My son spent part of his summer working at a seaweed farm in very, very rural Panama. And he had a fantastic time. So that's an evangelism and discipleship business at a hyper-local level. That's the biggest category of things that people we serve want to get after. There's also environmental stewardship, healthcare, education, and all of the things that you would think of as categories of things that Jesus people would care about.
Okay. Thank you so much. Awesome answer.
Thank you, Scott. All right, Aimee, we're going to try to get through 4 more fabulous questions we have here in the time that we have. The next question comes from a new friend of mine who I get to meet tomorrow, but apparently I get to meet her today, so I'm so excited. Flavia, are you still with us? And can you go ahead and unmute her, please?
Okay, good evening. Hello, everyone. My name is Flavia from Uganda, Karamoja, and I'm a founder for Adamara for Child Initiative. My question was, what are some of the grassroots initiatives, either for profit or not for profit, that can support indigenous or vulnerable communities, where all they have, the expectations are provision from something they receive and then directly have it finished, or hand-to-mouth strategies, not just because of laxity, but because of the nature of environmental marginalized capacity that they have. Yes. That's my question. Thank you, Ryan.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. That is such a good question. And I want to admit that I feel ill-equipped to answer it, because I sit in Kansas City in the middle of the US, and I feel like answering what things do indigenous communities needs to be answered by indigenous communities. So acknowledging that I feel very ill-equipped to answer the question, I'm going to go ahead and venture a couple of things that I've seen. So one of them is this business that my son worked in Panama. There are no jobs, but there's a lot of ocean. And they were able to get they were able to get the rights to farm seaweed in the ocean and hire some guys to go farm seaweed. It's a thing. My son was a water cowboy. That's what this job is. And so they're not just meeting needs by employing people, but they've also had to build roads. They've had to build housing. They've had to put in kind of a little bit of a sewer functionality. And so that's one expression. There's also dozens of ways that Foundations for Farming has, throughout Zambia and that region in Africa, engaged in hyperlocal and then somewhat scalable endeavors to help indigenous communities. But just being present in the community day after day for a long period of time gives rise to the answers that the community needs. Couple of examples.
I love that answer, Aimee, because it starts with "we don't know," and it says that the people there do know much better than we do, and that if we could bring what we've been blessed with, the resources we've been blessed with, and we could partner together with the resources and the wisdom they've been blessed with, together we could really see progress.
And it actually, there's two sides of mentorship. Mentorship is a lot of knowledge transfer and listening, but it's also access. A really good mentor is somebody who says, you don't just need my knowledge, you need my connections. And so offering access is part of what I think a really good partnership can look like. A really good impact investor is somebody who doesn't just bring capital to the table and knowledge to the table, but also access and introductions.
All right. Thank you, Aimee. Moving along here, going from a new friend to a close friend, Deborah Thomas. Can you go ahead and unmute Deborah Thomas, and you can go ahead and ask your question, please, Deb?
Yes, thank you, Ryan. My question, Aimee, really kind of stems from trying to understand how, the Impact Foundation does things versus the typical financial world kind of thing. And so I was asking about the typical avenues of organizations to join the Impact Foundation's portfolio. And on the flip side of that is, how do investors find your organizations and evaluate them to make further investments? Okay, in the for-profit world, that happens in specific ways. I'm sure it's different, but I'm wondering if you could give us some flavor about that.
Yeah. So Impact Foundation plays a connector role. Once a donor investor has found the company that they want to invest in, we'll do the vetting, we'll facilitate. We actually hold the investment on our books, manage the investment. We're a donor advised fund. So donors tell us what they want us to recommend, things for us to invest in. Once a company is on our platform, we can share that to the rest of the community in an educational format. So that goes out through our newsletter, goes on our website. We have occasionally opportunities through webinars for companies to come and pitch. So that's kind of our role. How do donor investors find companies to invest in? Mostly communities like the Lion's Den Dallas, Birmingham, Ambassadors Impact Network. There's a group in Indianapolis, Keystone, communities of like-minded individuals sharing the load and helping to vet investment opportunities.
Okay.
Thanks, Deb.
Thank you.
And good to see you too. Paul Wright, if we could unmute Paul Wright. Paul, you're next.
Let's see. Okay. Am I unmuted? No,
You
there
are.
we go.
Good to go.
Okay. Hi, Aimee. Paul Wright. I work for a nonprofit serving Central Appalachia. I'm the investment manager for our first fund, and so we're about to raise our second fund, and we're experiencing questions around internal rates of return. We got concessionary rates 5 years ago. Just wondering, now that I heard you're mainly donor advised funds, I don't know if you're managing funds, investment funds, but how do you navigate people, or at least the conversation about internal rates of return for wealthy individuals, family offices, foundations that want to invest in a fund like ours?
Delicately, our definition of a successful investment is one that does what we think it's going to do, which is not prescriptive. So if somebody says, I'm making this investment because I want a 3% IRR and this kind of impact, and it does that, that's fantastic. If somebody comes and says, I'm expecting this to have between a 20 and 25% IRR and this kind of impact, and it does that, that's fantastic. So I think it starts with helping make sure expectations are aligned. And sometimes we have to start a step back, which is to say, help people figure out what it is that they want. Folks who have made more than a couple of investments often find that they're looking at a portfolio view. So they want some things that are sacrificial, some things that are totally market rate, and then kind of build a portfolio in between.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. All right. A new friend of mine doing some incredible work around the world. Dries, can you unmute? Dries, I'm not going to embarrass myself by trying to pronounce your last name. I apologize, but if you would go ahead.
No problem. Thank you, Ryan, and thank Aimee.
you.
It's been a long time.
Good to see you.
Yeah, good, man. Just a quick question. Thinking of in general now, is it advisable to let the client, so like you said, it's important to have your client as a priority first of all, giving the excellent service and product. Is it okay for your client to somehow know that underlying there's a aim to serve the kingdom and to serve vulnerable communities with them buying into your company or buying your product? I'm thinking of a monthly subscription kind of client that knows they buy the product on a monthly subscription, but the money that they pay for their product or their service is actually funding a vulnerable community or a project otherwise. I remember in Zambia we did that, and some of the people, because it's a Christian nation, they just fell in love with a product because they started renting properties and they knew that their rental money that they pay actually funds vulnerable schools or orphanages or stuff like that. And they would, for example, never complain that the bulb needs changing or anything. They said, no, don't spend money on us. We're going to pay the rent and we'll fix whatever is needed because our money goes somewhere. But I'm just thinking of communities where it's not necessarily Christian communities. Is it okay? Is it advisable?
It's okay. I don't think it's required. And here's why. When a regular entrepreneur sells a regular product to a customer, they don't say, hey, if you buy this product, I'm going to get to buy my boat. It's just presumed in the exchange of goods and services that it's up to the owner to decide what to do with the profits. And so I don't think you have to, but I would say if it's edifying, then absolutely. So if it will draw somebody into the story, if it will draw somebody closer to the gospel, if it will cause them to, if it could cause them to think, I wonder why, then it might be a good idea to say it. If, on the other hand, it's going to push them further away because it feels like judgment or whatnot, then I don't think, then it probably wouldn't be a good idea. I can't answer the question because I don't know your customer well enough, but I would say those would be the factors that I would consider.
Great. Yeah. Good.
Thank you very much.
That was a
Dries.
great question, Dries. Thank you.
Yeah.
Dries,
Dries.
sorry.
Dries, yeah. You may have said it right, Aimee. Maybe.
I don't think so, but.
Okay, good. If I had it right, it's a first, just so we all know. But let's conclude our time today with the question that when someone ever asks me this question, I actually think of Ray Chung because he's so good at asking this question. And it's one I forget to ask so often. And it's such an important question. So if you would go ahead and unmute Ray, we will end our time today. Thank you for the fabulous participation of everyone, the incredible questions. And Aimee, thank you for your time. Go ahead, Ray.
Hey, Aimee. Thank you for your modeling of a humble posture of which you shared as well as responded to these questions. My question is, how might this Ardent community serve you and the team at Impact Foundation? What might we do that would be most helpful to you and your team?
Thank you, Ray. It's what you're already doing. Prayer first. And I don't mean that dismissively. I mean that very sincerely. The real work that we are about only happens through prayer. And then the expression of it in the world is super important. But we don't really know what to do unless the Father makes it clear to us. And so I genuinely mean prayer. And the spiritual opposition that we face in trying to move kingdom assets is pretty substantial. And so prayers of protection and guidance, prayers of deliverance from pride, it's easy at this point to say, we've deployed $1 billion. I'm pretty good at this. I know what I'm doing. And it's God. God did this. I could tell you stories for days of the ways in which God made it so abundantly clear that this was his work and he actually didn't need us. When we started, one of the very first investments we made, I got a call. I was lying in bed because I'd had a car accident and I couldn't get out of bed. It was like the day after. And my co-founder had just had eye surgery. He had a retinal detachment. So he was also lying face down in bed. And we got a call from somebody who said, can you facilitate a $10 million investment? At the time, that made our year. It put us on the map, establishing, like, this was so early on. It was like a huge deal. And I got off the phone and I called Jeff and I said, it is, and we both agreed, God is absolutely saying, I do not need you guys. I'm going to let you participate with me as long as you stay humble and listen to me. And so prayer for protection and for the Lord to continue to reveal to us how he would have us operate in the world. And then encouragement. Ray, you are such a gifted encourager. There are lots of other practical things. Invest with us, bring us great entrepreneurs. But just those two things that you're already doing are great gifts. So thank you.
I agree. Great answer, Aimee, too, because prayer is one of the most powerful piece. But encouragement, gosh, when I'm an encourager. So when I get encouraged, it like fuels my spirit. As we conclude here, Aimee, as people on this call want to know more about the Impact Foundation, as they want to get involved in the Impact Foundation, should they just go to the website, or what's the best way to get involved and learn more?
Yeah, I would start on the website, and there are several entry points on the website. You can also email me if you'd like, and I can connect you to team members if you have specific questions. I look forward to connecting.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for your time today, Aimee. Thank you so much for joining us. We really, really appreciate it. We know your time is valuable and you have a lot that God has called you to. Thank you to everyone on the call for taking time to be with us today. Such a privilege to spend time with you and such an opportunity to learn alongside of you. Have a great day, everyone.